What's up, everybody? So, Putin gave a speech recently where he talked about, oh, Russian economy and used the word sustainable. Now, that word tends to have a kind of a dirty meaning in the truth community, if you will. But it doesn't have to be that necessarily, right? He could just be talking about performance of the Russian economy being less dependent on the outsiders. That could be what it means, but there it was. He used the word. He also talked about improving their welfare system and what sounded like uh, at least a preliminary version of universal basic income. Then he was also talking about how the Russian central bank won't be printing any more currency, which could be interpreted a bunch of different ways, right? Could just mean they won't be creating any new money. He could be lying, right? Or it could also mean that they won't be printing any physical cash, but will switch to some kind of perhaps blockchain digital currency, right? Who knows? Um, but there it was, his speech and him saying that. He's also been talking about the junkies. Clearly, Zelensky is running things in Kiev, so there was that. But let's talk a little bit about how this war has been going, and obviously there's a ton of misinformation. We can't know what's true, what's propaganda. Well, some of the propaganda is pretty blatant on both sides, but especially in the West. So, obviously take everything with a huge grain of salt. And, oh, yeah. Big shout out to KA, one viewer who is in Ukraine, maybe still, I don't know. Haven't heard from you in a while. Hope everything is well. If you feel like giving us an update in the comments, that would be great. Let us know what you know, how you're doing, and anybody else for that matter who may be residing in the war zone. But it would seem that despite the fact that Kremlin is saying they're not targeting civilians, right? It would seem that they are, but then again, once you pick up arms and you engage in the conflict, according to, from what I understand, the international uh, war law. Funny they have laws on how to conduct war, right? Should make you think about some of these conflicts and how orchestrated they really are. I'm not saying they're orchestrated completely and utterly, but at the very least they're somewhat orchestrated, right? If there are laws governing wars, clearly wars are at least to a very large degree ostensibly orchestrated, right? So anyway, you know, once you start shooting at the Russians, you're no longer a civilian, right? So with Putin saying that they're not targeting civilians, maybe they're not, right? Maybe they're targeting people that are shooting at them, people they think are shooting at them, who knows, right? But there are a lot of people on the ground saying that uh, the Russians are targeting people who aren't professional soldiers, right? Let's put it that way. Then there are also some people, again, as I stated in another video, saying that Ukrainians seem to be targeting uh, non-professional or not professional soldiers, if soldiers at all, perhaps civilians even, within Ukraine, which, could be explained because there are pro-Russian civilians turned perhaps soldiers in Ukraine targeting Ukrainians too, right? So it's a big old mess, right? Um, and a lot of innocent and maybe not so innocent people are dying, right? There also have been videos, I saw at least one video of, well, maybe it's here somewhere, of Ukrainians, man, like even mainstream media will post these videos where the guy is clearly high off his ass, right? But videos of what look like, if we're gonna use cliches, football fans, kids handling these AK-47s in a small apartment, muzzle swiping each other, talking about who do we kill, laughing, playing around, and also saying what can we get for these guns, right, money-wise. So Zelensky again giving guns to just whomever, right? What the fuck was all that about? Putin and Ukraine, it would seem, targeting civilians, or not necessarily civilians, used to be civilians, maybe all of the above, right? Uh, are both sides doing this because they want to, well, send a whole bunch of immigrants, or to have Ukrainians, leave the country and maybe make room for someone else? Hint, hint. But New Jeru. But yeah, there's this whole narrative that, and I'm all over the place here, get used to it, of the Russian army being so incompetent, so on. And yeah, there's some truth to it, again, because it would seem that Putin, at least when it comes to the Western, or again the Z tanks, the Western Ukrainian operations, right? We're not seeing very much of what's happening with the V tanks, right? Which would be the Eastern operation, Donbas area, so on and so forth. But yeah, definitely the Western wing seems to be using a lot of old crappy equipment. They're running out of fuel. They're not supplied very well. It's a whole bunch of kids who don't seem to even want to be there, who are lied to. They're basically, seems to me, sacrifice, right? Which is why I talked about Gen Z, and this being some kind of, ritualistic sacrifice, perhaps, right? Also. But then you look on the Western side, and I am talking about the West now, right? Collectively known as the West. Uh, they've been calling for, essentially mercenaries. I mean, they're telling us they're not getting paid, but I have a hard time believing that. Just kids, essentially, young men from the West going in to fight for this cokehead, right? Actor. And again, a lot of them aren't very well trained. They're just, you know, most of them probably gamers looking to, shoot some guns and, oh damn, maybe kill some people. So basically, now that my dogs are taken care of, long story short, it seems that both sides, but this shouldn't surprise anyone, because wars seem to be that. They seem to be. I'm not trying to oversimplify these conflicts, but a large part of why we have wars is to call, right? Call the population, decrease the population, is to sacrifice young men, women, and children. So both sides are sending in young, dumb, and full of what? Nothing, I guess. Men to their deaths, right? At the end of the day, someone's going to surrender, right? Someone's going to lose, and it's most likely going to be Ukraine. I know the propaganda is telling you otherwise, right? Because, well, and people are swallowing it up because for years they've been brainwashed by Hollywood that the Russians always lose, right? At the end, ultimately, the Russians always lose, right? So it's easy for the Westerners to swallow this idea that Russians are losing while at the same time taking over the country, right? Like, make that make sense. But unless NATO gets involved, or some other powerful military gets involved and fights against or on the side of the Ukrainians, um, they're probably going to lose, right? Putin, whatever he aims to do ultimately, is going to get that done, it would seem anyway, right? And sending in all these Westerners, all these kids, is really just going to prolong the suffering of everybody, right? Definitely people in Ukraine, but all of us, right? So that to me, right, seems to be the goal that both sides are aiming for, right? Prolong this conflict and destroy our global economy. I have an idea for a video on globalism and all that. Maybe that'll be next. But, prolonging the conflict, dragging his feet the way Putin kind of has, because it really seems like if he really wanted to blitzkrieg, and I'm not saying that that's, no, Russian military's, what is it, modus operandi, right? But it would seem that when they went into Iran, that's what they did. So, if they were to, for example, use a lot more of their force and not these incompetent kids and these shit vehicles, it seems like they could have gotten things done much quicker and more efficiently. But, and again, I'm not saying that this is, there's a lot of different goals here, I'm sure. And for whatever these reasons are, this is why the Russians are acting this way, right? Kind of dragging their feet, not rushing, basically, right? Haha. uh, because the longer this conflict goes, the more the global economy suffers, the more all of us suffer, and that seems to be the case. That's just kind of what I'm seeing. Maybe that's my bias, right? Sending in all these kids to get killed for no apparent reason other than to prolong this conflict, because ultimately, again, one side is going to surrender or lose, and it's most likely going to be Ukraine, right? And um, a lot of innocent, maybe not so innocent people will have died, right? Why can't we just get together? Why can't these powers get together and do a calculus, right? This is what we got on our side. This is the manpower, military power that you have. The chances of you winning are 5%, right? So let's, I don't know, simulate some kind of war game or something like that. Calculate who the winner is based on what they got, right? And call it a day, right? Or have Putin get in the cage with Zelensky and duke it out, right? Something like that, right? Why do all these innocent people have to die, right? Why? Well, because this is what it is, right? This is what one of the goals of these conflicts, in my opinion, is to sacrifice, uh, lower the population, create havoc, right? Destroy economy, so on and so forth, right? Look, I'm going to keep saying this because it's very important. Everything that we've seen so far seems to suggest that Putin is working with Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum, and the goal is to destroy economy, right? Their goal, implicit goal, is to destroy economies and to use war, right? And then uh, problem, reaction, solution, right? And then to provide the solution to the problems that they've created, war and destruction of economy, by bringing in, this new economy, new world order, and no more war, supposedly, right? So simple, 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 simple. So until we see some evidence that Putin is actually against these globalists, right? We need to see evidence of this. I think Occam's razor suggests, and all the evidence we have suggests, that he's working with the globalists, at least to a large degree, right? So that's why I draw the conclusions that I'm drawing. Both sides seem to be content exterminating young men and prolonging this conflict instead of just because ultimately I think, right, again, unless NATO or US gets involved, Ukraine's going to fall and a lot of innocent people will have died. A lot of infrastructure will have been destroyed. Ukrainian economy is going to be gutted. All these other economies, global economy is going to suffer. And for what, right? When this could be again worked out quicker, probably, right? Anyway, if they really wanted to decide, this is an interesting channel. Eli Alkash, he seems to be pro-Russian, right? It is what it is. There are very few people out there who are taking no sides, right? So everybody got blood on their hands, right? So when your economy suffers and you start suffering, right? Don't go blaming Russia. Don't go blaming the West. Blame both of them, right? It takes two to make war, obviously. Anyway, there are what you could consider pro-Ukrainian channels, and when they show videos that have to do with this conflict, from this conflict, they get like thousands, tens of thousands, new channels, right, that just sprouted out of nowhere, get tons of views. And then you have this kind of channel, gets 44 views, right, because he's pro-Russian. I think that's why. So this whole idea that, there are no Nazis in Ukraine or the problem is blown way out of proportion, that's nonsense. Maybe I'll talk about that in just a second. But clearly, lots of Ukrainians have been brainwashed by this Nazi ideology, this Ukrainian supremacy, if you will, right? But yeah, she's gonna get the Muscovites. Both of them will, right? Just as they did way back in the day. Here we go. How many views does... I mean, you would think a video like that would get a ton of views, right? Ukrainian soccer fans, I mean, look at their attire, right? Here we go. I'll help you out, brother. Playing with guns, right? Talking about selling them, who they're gonna kill, so on and so forth. 2 days ago, 61 views, right? Eli, what's going on with your videos, brother? 16 views, right? 61, 2,500 because of Bald and Bankrupt. 35, right? Anyway, man, we are all over the place in this video. Yeah, it seems to me that both sides want to create havoc, right? This is exactly what this is about. And they want to just prolong this conflict, right? Because that's the goal. It doesn't seem to make much sense of what's going on, right? NATO's talking about not getting involved, right? While at the same time basically getting involved, but kind of half-assed. Because, if NATO gets involved, that'll probably end the conflict quickly, unless China steps in, right? It'll escalate, but then the conflict will probably end fairly quickly. But they're not getting involved, right? They're saying, let's have Poland, right? Poland send some fighter airplanes to Ukraine. So Poland's like, yeah, that's a risky move, right? We get involved, we're essentially declaring war. If this is how we get involved, even without sending any of our men in there, just giving the Ukrainians our arms. Putin said, that's going to be a declaration. It is a declaration of war, I think, again, by international law, right? So Poland said, okay, well, let's send those airplanes to Germany, American or NATO base in Germany, and send them from there to Ukraine. So then U.S. is like, oh, no, we don't want to get involved, right? Because then Putin's gonna, maybe in retaliation, maybe attack American bases or whatever, and the conflict's gonna escalate. U.S. is gonna have to step in, which may eventually happen, right? But the goal, it would seem again, is to drag this out, right? Make this as slow and painful as possible. Both sides seem to be following that goal. So they're getting involved, right? This essentially is World War III, because the West, by and large, has gotten involved, and they're sending their men, however, untrained, and however they're half-assed their efforts, they're getting involved. But it's half-assed. Putin's all half-assing it, and they're half-assing it, right? Which is just gonna slowly kill off a whole bunch of people, and also by means of destroying our economy. So it's just, it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense, man. Anyway, right? Ukraine soldier calls Zelensky dickhead and tells him to go fuck himself, then burns Ukrainian flag, right? So there's, the things on the ground aren't that simple, right? So you could understand maybe Ukrainians bombing within, other Ukrainians, and Russians bombing Ukrainian civilians, or Russian dominated cities within Ukraine. It's just one big fucking mess. So it's that's what it seems like to me. Slow crash and burn, slowly dragging everybody into the conflict, little by little, slowly but surely, in order to make this as painful on all of us as possible, right? Yeah, this channel gets hardly any views, right? And then you got all these other videos getting millions of views of Russians, right? Quote unquote losing. Ukrainian farmers confiscate Russian tank, right? Ukrainian Azov regiment strike a Russian tank. Oh, the heroes. Ukrainian soldiers seize tanks after taking down convoy, right? Tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of views. This just, obviously Russia is losing. Let's see what Inside Edition has to say about the Z.
It's Russian shorthand for victory, emblazoned on Russian tanks and military vehicles in Ukraine. Today, critics around the world are calling it the new swastika.
За Россию! За президента!
ZV Schud Zahud, yeah? Probably.
In Russia,
That
Putin's
makes the most
propaganda
sense.
machine is operating at full speed. Russians are adopting the Z as a symbol
But this is Generation Z, right? Full display. These are the morons that are gonna go and die.
of national pride. It can be seen on cars and vans in Moscow. Young cancer patients lined up in a Z formation
Right? Young, terminally ill people.
outside a hospice. A Russian gymnast put Z
Right? A little kid. Generation Z.
on his shirt after he was beaten by a Ukrainian at a tournament in the Middle East. He's now under investigation for taunting his rival.
Right? Russians are losing.
All independent and international media, including CNN International, has been shut down in Russia. Social media networks are also operating under strict censorship so that the Russian people cannot see how badly things are going for them in Ukraine.
Right? Just complete and utter projection. RT has been censored. Russian videos, as I just showed you, pro-Russian videos are being censored. It's the same on both sides.
The concern within Russia is that people on the ground, can't get accurate information, are not, seeing what is actually happening, in Ukraine, and are being told a version of events that is the government-approved version of events that may not line up with reality.
This is what Russians are seeing on state-run TV. A young pop star in pigtails warning children not to trust anything they see on social media.
Greetings, citizens of the world.
The vigilante hackers known as Anonymous say they have hacked into Russian TV, broadcasting the images the rest of the world is seeing, and the terrible toll Russian aggression is taking on innocent civilians. These captured Russian soldiers appeared on Ukrainian to look at those wounds. This lieutenant colonel says he was duped into believing Kyiv had been overthrown by Nazis. He says he now feels shame for invading Ukraine. Apple, Microsoft, Netflix, Visa, and MasterCard have all pulled out of Russia, and now...
Yeah, whatever. Just complete another projection. I mean, I'm not saying, obviously, maybe it's not so obvious, but yeah, both sides are engaged in propaganda and nonsense and so on and so forth. But yeah, we're not picking sides here. But I mean, I would think that the Russian side isn't as blatant. I would say that on average they probably lie more by omission, whereas the West, the decadent West, they just straight up make shit up, right? Show you video game footage and all this other nonsense. So it is what it is. But both sides are using propaganda because it's just what happens, you know what I mean? And I think both sides, in some weird way, shape, or form, are working together to fuck all of us. That my mind hasn't changed about that, and maybe that's just my bias. It is what it is. But again, until you show me evidence that Putin is actually against the globalists, what am I supposed to think, right? I'm supposed to invent things and imagine shit. If he's so against globalism, then why is his, why doesn't he not have or hasn't worked towards a self-sustaining Russian Federation economy without, reliance on this global economy? I mean, he has so much land, so many different people, so many different countries, cultures under one banner, right? It's a form of globalism anyway. But if you want to say, well, not exactly, it's Eastern hemispherism or whatever the fuck you want to call that shit. Why hasn't he done, with all these resources and all this power, and I'm not saying it's that simple, but why hasn't he done more to be independent? Clearly he's still dependent on Western. He's dependent on globalism, right? You shut him off from global trade, and he's gonna suffer no less than everybody else, right? So Putin is a globalist, right? He probably just prefers a different flavor of globalism, but he has not created, with all these resources he has, a sustainable economy that's not dependent on the West. So he, whatever the reason for that is, like, at the end of the day, Russia is a globalist country. It's part of globalism, right? It's swallowing up land and bringing all these different people under one banner, looking to erase their cultural differences. That's what Russia is doing. So how is Putin anti-globalism? He just, the people on that side would like to be the ones in charge, and they have a different flavor of globalism that they prefer. But at the end of the day, it's globalism, right? So the differences between the two sides engaged in this conflict are minute, and the goals are the same, right? To rule over as much land and as much territory as they can, ultimately, right? These are this is a globalist conflict that's going to result in more globalism, probably, right? So that's my long-ass rant about what's happening here. It's just, given this narrative that it's us against them, right? And there's definitely something to that, right? But given that these are supposed to be mortal enemies, well, why the fuck why are they one and the same, it would seem? Why do they act so similarly, right? Like, it doesn't make any sense to me, right? Especially given the fact that they all meet together, congregate, and discuss shit in secret, right? Just as these negotiations, right? They're they're meeting together and they're discussing shit. Why not just, like back in the day when we had real wars, and I'm not saying this is completely fake, but back in the day when we had real wars, right? And people met to discuss shit, people would get poisoned, they get trapped in, in some building and burnt alive, you know what I mean? Like, this type of stuff doesn't happen anymore, right? If Putin really wanted to take out Zelensky, it wouldn't be that difficult. It really wouldn't be that difficult, right? They're meeting, discussing, talking, right? Somehow the fighting stops. When the fighting should be when these two people meet, right? Because they're orchestrating this whole thing. Let's see if we could follow some common sense, right? That's where the fighting should be happening, because these people apparently hate each other and they're against one another, and they're waging war against one another, supposedly. But no, they're sending in all the fucking dupes to fight it out while they meet in fucking secret and discuss who knows what, right? It's really not that difficult, people. I don't think it is anyway, but, you let me know what you think. Thanks for watching.